And thank you very much for joining us, Alex.
Hi.
Thank you very much. Now, you were advised to Boris Johnson actually before COVID hit, sort of in the campaign in the early period of him in office. I just want to ask you, in terms of the evidence that he's giving, he is, he's apologised. We've played lots of clips already. He said sorry to people who, only by the way, to the people who lost loved ones. The rest of us, no. And now he's been talking about how, people were frazzled. It was very difficult, very complicated. They should have perhaps paid attention sooner, made more issues. Do you think that there was an aspect to this where it was Boris Johnson as the man, the personality of the man who was a fantastic campaigner for office, for Brexit and everything, that actually he wasn't cut out to be Prime Minister at this time? We've heard so many advisors saying he was bamboozled. Well, he's admitted he was bamboozled by the data. He said people were frazzled. That he really didn't do detail as much. Do you think that actually there were flaws in his personality, weaknesses in his personality that are part of the issue here?
I think we all accept that Boris's skill set was perhaps not best suited to this kind of situation. Okay, I think nobody would dispute that. However, I would say that the set of decisions that he was being asked to make in a situation that was extremely fluid and unknown, it's all very well looking back now and knowing what we know now to say, well, obviously that decision X should have been taken at a certain time. But just remember the situation that he was in. He was being asked to take decisions of a magnitude that no other prime minister had to take, arguably, since the war. That was how big these decisions were. Are we really suggesting that perhaps some other more boring prime minister, let's say it was Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak or whoever, would have done any better, frankly, given the enormity of the challenge and this is the crucial thing, given the uncertainty? It's all very well now saying, "Oh, we know what happened. We can look back." Well, but right in the middle of it,
except Alex, this is why we have pre-pandemic planning. This is why we have it based on facts and data, and not on people making last-minute emergency decisions. But also, if you go back to what Whitty and Valance and everyone was saying in the weeks up to lockdown, until I think a week before lockdown, everything that we know now, we knew then. They told us in the press conferences. I don't understand why people think we know so much more now. We don't.
Well, so you're right. There were plans in place, but they were from 2011, and they were based on obviously a flu situation that was completely different to the situation.
What's completely different about it?
Well, it was completely different in the sense that it was based on a variant of bird flu that assumed that you could allow a large section of the population to catch it and get this so-called herd immunity,
which is literally what they did in Sweden. Which is what they did in Sweden, and it's what our pandemic policy was, and it's what Whitty and Valance said we were going to do. It was the entire plan, and if we'd done it, we'd have had a lower excess death rate.
Well, okay, fine. I mean, that's another debate, right?
No, that's the debate. That's the whole point, isn't it, Alex? That's the debate, and it's the one thing that's not being discussed. Let me just read you. Let me just read a bit. So we had some exchanges where the KC has been asking Boris Johnson about what Chris Whitty had said about the timing of implementation of measures was crucial because compliance is dependent on that. So there was the belief, wasn't there, in March 2020, if we did lock down, then people wouldn't be willing to do it for longer, as it was. People were clamouring for more and more lockdown. But actually, so you had to make sure people were compliant. And Boris Johnson said, yes, it was a prevailing view and his influence, that it did influence his decision-making. But he said also, he asked if he would have implemented measures earlier. This is the big debate at the COVID inquiry. If this was not the case, he said, we did lock down, but then it bounced back. But he said, I can't say that I would have gone earlier. But the interesting thing, of course, is the surprise that you lock down to stop people getting the virus, and then they come out again, and then the virus comes back and spreads. I mean, no beep Sherlock. So how obvious is that? That was why you don't lock down, because all you do is delay. Boris Johnson and his advisors at the time, which didn't include you at the time, seemed to be surprised by basic epidemiology.
Well, yes, and also remember that what's been really interesting is in this discussion is about how the view at the time was, well, you can't You can't lock everyone down because they won't put up with it for long. But as you say, in the end, we locked ourselves up. This is something that we should all just remember. All it took was for the Prime Minister of the day to go on telly and say, stay at home. And broadly, most people did.
Yes.
Most
people were able to, and people were delighted to get their groceries delivered, but they still expected the streets to be swept, and they still expected people to work in cafes, in the kitchen, even though they weren't allowed to go to cafes to deliver to them. I mean, millions and millions of people worked throughout the COVID pandemic.
Absolutely. And that's why, by the way, the country had to spend so much money, which we're still paying off, on being able to sustain that.
Yeah, indeed. Can I ask you, though, your time working with Boris Johnson, do you feel sorry for him? Because I certainly at the time felt, God, this is, as you said, this is the, biggest decision-making, from a non-wartime Prime Minister. Nobody who wants to be Prime Minister walks into this stuff. Do you feel sorry for him that he had to go through this?
What I found interesting in his testimony today was he did look a bit rattled and a bit emotional at points, and he doesn't really usually show that. Knowing him as I do, yes, there is a part of me that thinks, golly, having just won a big election, and now he's faced with this. Now, nobody is crying for Boris in the broader context. Okay, I accept that. But just looking at the impact on whoever would have been leading at that time, what a burden. And now, of course, having to look back on it and think, well, could I have done something differently? What should I have done? I would be interested to know what his regrets are.
I think we may. Who knows? Over 2 days, we may get to it. Alex Crowley, so appreciate you joining us. He's former advisor to Boris Johnson, not during that period. Thank you for joining us.